Is this the kind of ceasefire that leads to lasting peace or just delays the next war? I'm Michael Oku. Really appreciate you joining this live stream on YouTube and TikTok. Here's what we're getting at. After weeks of fighting along the Israel-Lebanon border, there's now a fragile truce. It's just past 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Beirut, and thousands of Lebanese had been returning already to their homes in the southern Lebanon. But it could unravel just as quickly. The same tensions are still there, the same risks still in play. So what's really changed, and how close are we to all of this flaring up again? And what's at stake this time? Send your comments and questions and help me drive this conversation. I want to go straight to the center of this story, which of course is Lebanon, where Israeli forces had been trying to eliminate or drive Hezbollah as far from their northern border as possible. And Lebanon is where we find journalist Stella Mana. I suppose not surprisingly, we've been seeing some pretty strong reactions, Stella, about the ceasefire from locals. Let's have a quick listen to some of what they had to say.
I
was extremely happy because we were able to come back to the village quickly, and that the ceasefire came into effect so suddenly. As you can see, Israel destroyed the entire village. They destroyed the square, and they destroyed my dad's shops, not for the first time.
We are hoping there will be a real ceasefire, and that the government can impose a real ceasefire through the mediators. Although we don't know how fair they are. We just hope that this is real and serious.
We're feeling heartache and anguish. May God keep our men healthy. No words can describe the fight they put up in the south. But we're feeling a lot of heartache over the men we lost. We lost many friends and brothers.
Heartache, I think some hope there, Stella, and also some tension. Does that track with what you've been hearing from people there in Beirut?
Well, last night already celebrations started, and you can hear it behind me. Some people are very happy. So last night in Beirut, celebrations already started in Dakhia and the southern suburbs of Beirut. There was a lot of celebratory gunfire. I'm now standing here next to the highway inside or in South Lebanon. Behind me, the traffic is piling up because there are a lot of people who are trying to make their way back to the south. I spoke with some of them. Some took all their belongings with them in the car, and they're hoping to return for good. But some of them are also more careful, saying that they just want to go have a look what their home actually looks like.
Yeah, and as you're talking, Stella, we hear some of the cars honking. There's an element of celebratory sort of nature in all this. I should mention U.S. President Donald Trump was on the grounds of the White House when he addressed the ceasefire to a gaggle of reporters. Let's listen to what the president said, and then I want to get your take on it.
We will have an agreement between Lebanon, and they're going to take care of Hezbollah. But they're going to be working on Hezbollah right now. But we'll have an agreement between Israel, very importantly, and Lebanon.
Stella, can Lebanon take care of Hezbollah, like Trump says? And what does that mean? Disarmament of Hezbollah, as Israel demands?
So what Trump is talking about is the position of the US and Israel, which is basically that for a longer peace agreement, Hezbollah needs to be disarmed. But of course, we have to keep in mind that this 10-day ceasefire agreement, what we now have, is only the beginning of a longer period of negotiations. Trump wants a meeting with Netanyahu and the Lebanese president, Aoun. And we have to wait and see, because during these meetings, the details of the peace, of a longer peace, need to be discussed. And during this process, there need to be solutions that need to be found, because the position of the Lebanese state has still not changed. The Lebanese state is too weak to disarm Hezbollah. And if this is a condition for Israel and the US, then there need to be a solution to found.
You know, Stella, I feel so often that we keep asking the same questions over and over and over again, and yet it is significant and important to ask them. So, do people there think a long-term ceasefire is in fact achievable?
It really depends on who you ask. There are some people who are optimistic who think that maybe now is the momentum in history where the relationships between Israel and Lebanon could be normalized. But the majority of people that I spoke to are skeptical. First of all, because they say nothing has really changed. As I just said, Hezbollah is strong and the Lebanese state is still too weak to disarm Hezbollah. And Israel is also trying to keep its position in South Lebanon. The second reason why people are more skeptical is because they don't trust Israel. The last ceasefire in 2024 was violated by Israel more than 10,000 times. And many people are saying, who can tell us that this wouldn't be the case again this time?
Stella, we're already getting some comments and questions from some of our viewers on YouTube. One user is asking, is a ceasefire with Lebanon or Hezbollah? I think this person's trying to say, you know, is the ceasefire with Israel between Lebanon and Israel or Hezbollah and Israel? And we know the answer to that, but maybe you can clarify it. I'm sure lots of people have questions similar to that.
So the negotiations and talks who led to this ceasefire were done by Israel, the US, and the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government shouldn't be mistaken with Hezbollah. So Hezbollah was not included in the negotiations, but the militia said yesterday when the ceasefire was announced, and also this morning, that they will abide and that they will follow this ceasefire as long as Israel is also not violating the agreement.
You know, as you talk about Hezbollah, I'm curious, are people there reading this ceasefire as a victory for Hezbollah?
Again, it depends who you ask. If you ask the people behind me, the ones who are returning to the south, I spoke with a lot of them and they said, well, that we can return today is due to Hezbollah and them fighting back the Israeli troops. But of course, this is not the opinion of everyone. There are a lot of people who don't agree with this, who do see that Hezbollah is weakened and who don't want war. And of course, the presence of Israeli troops who are still in Lebanon, who are still on the Lebanese territory, is also something that a lot of people don't like.
Well, that's journalist Stella Mana. Many, many thanks, Stella. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has also posted about the ceasefire on his Truth social media platform. Trump wrote, "I hope Hezbollah acts nicely and well during this important period of time. It will be he says, great moment for them if they do. No more killing. Must finally have peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump." Dr. H.A. Hellyer has been standing by patiently. I want to thank him for that. H.A. is a senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. He's also senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. A warm welcome. I'm sure we got your resume in there, but probably not all of it. Nice to have you with us.
You're very kind. Thank you.
I want to start with what might be the most crucial issue here. Hezbollah wasn't a formal party to this agreement, as our correspondent there was just saying. And it's already signaled that Israeli troops remaining in southern Lebanon give it, Hezbollah, the right to resist. If the group that was actually engaged in the fighting isn't bound by the deal, what exactly has been agreed to?
So a few things here, just to frame this properly. Hezbollah was actually, even if indirectly, party to the deal because Hezbollah has representatives within the Lebanese cabinet. And the head of the Lebanese cabinet, the prime minister and the president, they authorized these talks and are urging Lebanon to abide by the outcome. So they can claim that they're not bound by it, but they have ministers in the government. So that's one. Two, they're absolutely correct that Israeli forces remain in Lebanon. They continue to occupy substantial swathes of Lebanese territory. This is not something that I think the Lebanese government accepts. It's simply the state of play as it stands right now. It's also important for your viewers to understand that we're calling this a ceasefire. There have been a number of ceasefires with the Israelis by the Lebanese over the years, including last year during the Gaza war. There have been different times. These ceasefires get broken multiple times, and disproportionately by quite some number by the Israelis. So I think that we also have to be cautious about thinking that this current arrangement means that there isn't going to be more strikes on Lebanese territory by the Israelis. I think, unfortunately, we can guarantee that. And there's already been tremendous loss of life on the Lebanese side as a result of these attacks by the Israelis.
Again, Israel's keeping troops in southern Lebanon and reserves the right to strike if it feels threatened. That's basically the same posture that unraveled the 2024 ceasefire, which I believe you just referenced. Is there anything different this time around that would produce a different outcome?
Yes, but not necessarily positively. There are signs positive and there are signs that are negative. On the negative side, you have Israeli ministers and other figures within Israeli society that are calling for the permanent annexation and settlement of parts of southern Lebanon by the state of Israel. And I know people don't want to take this seriously, and they say, "Oh, these are just like crazy voices." Well, these are the crazy voices that we're talking about annexing the West Bank. The West Bank has already been effectively annexed. They're also the same sort of voices that had the most gruesome discourse when it came to Gaza. Gaza was subjected to a genocidal war, and so on. So I don't think that we can just dismiss that quite so easily. So I think that there's a lot of rhetoric here that's a lot more intense actually than 2024. So that's on the negative side. On the positive side, I think there are a number of people in Washington, D.C. that don't want talks with Iran to be derailed by what's happening in Lebanon at the hands of the Israelis, and also see an opportunity to strengthen the Lebanese government at least somewhat, which would then force Hezbollah to be on the back foot. I also want your viewers to remember one of the main reasons why Hezbollah has power in South Lebanon and in Lebanon more generally is that the Lebanese state is weak, but also has been kept weak. The Lebanese government has been looking for support for the Lebanese armed forces for quite some time. And Israel heavily lobbied outside of the region, saying, no, we shouldn't have a strong Lebanese army. And again, against that vacuum, the group of Hezbollah has simply gained in prominence and in strength.
Hey, Chair, bear with me. I want you and those of you joining this live stream to listen to what Israelis in the north are saying about the ceasefire. Let's play those sound bites.
We can't tell Trump that we are against the ceasefire. Still, it's obvious to everyone that it won't last. What's most disappointing is that we'll continue to suffer as residents of the North. Only the residents of the North have suffered from Hezbollah for many years.
I was born here in Nahariya. We grew up in shelters. We wanted to make peace with the Lebanese years ago. But when their prime minister wanted to make peace with us, Hezbollah killed him. It will be hard, but let's give them a chance. I hope there will be peace.
Muted and definitely some animus. If that's representative of most feelings, it certainly doesn't bode well.
It doesn't. But to put a fine point on it, Israeli public opinion on the ongoing conflicts in the region, be it with Iran, be it with Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, you're not going to find, at least on the level of public opinion, much to make you incredibly optimistic. On the contrary, I think that Israeli public opinion has now settled in a very right-wing formation. Quite frankly, even those who are positioned on the left, in the context of Israeli political life, they haven't been particularly critical of how the government has proceeded on these files. They're critical of the government because they don't like Netanyahu. They find him corrupt. They don't appreciate what he's doing with the judiciary. But opposition, for example, to the war on Gaza was really limited to tactically this might not work in the same way, but there wasn't really much opposition to the overall destruction of Gaza. Nor is there that much opposition when it comes to what's happening in Lebanon with regards to the war with Iran, the West Bank, the terrorism that we've seen in the West Bank by Jewish Israeli settlers. I wouldn't. I'm just saying I don't know if you're going to find much optimism when you look at how Israeli public discourse has been unfolding over the last few years, and frankly, much further back than that.
H.A., a sensitive question here. I've been keeping an eye on the chat here, but again, this is a sensitive issue, of course. One viewer is writing, considering Israel's greater Israel ambitions, will they ever stop trying to take land? How do you respond to that?
I mean, I reference you to what I just said with regards to Israeli public opinion. There is a lot of sympathy for the idea that in order for Israel to be secure within the region, it needs to have more territory. That's one. So that's the greater Israel sort of component of that. And two, that it needs to have paramountcy in the region. And paramountcy not meaning that they're going to have some big empire all across the wider Arab world and Middle East region, but that they have freedom of action, that they're not bound by the same rules that everybody else is in terms of going beyond their borders to strike here or to strike there. That they, as they do right now in Lebanon, that they have quote unquote freedom to strike, to bomb, to preemptively target where they see fit. I know we're talking about Lebanon, but talk about Syria for a moment. As soon as the Assad regime came down, the Israelis moved in. They occupied yet another swathe of Syrian territory on the basis that they needed to preemptively do so. This is somebody else's country. It's not theirs. And they then said that they needed to intervene, quote unquote, in Soeda on behalf of the Jews. The Jews are not Israelis. The Jews, Syrian Jews, are not Israelis. They are Syrians. It's really nothing to do with Israel. So I think that there is quite a lot of sympathy for this expansionist kind of model. I'm not saying the expansionist part is a majority, but it doesn't take a majority to make this effective. It takes a strong minority, at least, and then an unwillingness from the majority to do much about it. And the very least, I think that's what we've seen with regards to all of the very ugly stories around, particularly Gaza,
Right.
Lebanon, and Syria over the last few years.
I'm interested in your take on this. Israel originally said its fight with Hezbollah had nothing to do with the U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal. Then we'll all remember, launched its most devastating wave of strikes on Lebanon in the entire war. Lebanon strikes we're talking about, big ones. Days later, there is, in fact, a Lebanon truce. That looks like a win, at least diplomatically, for Iran, doesn't it? And how might that win affect the way the parties here approach this ceasefire?
It's interesting because I think that actually different parties here will claim that they got something out of it. The Iranians will claim that it was their pressure that led to a ceasefire. The Lebanese will, and it could very well be that this was a factor in the negotiations. The Lebanese will claim, and I think that they're also justified in this, in saying, we negotiated this as Lebanese without having anybody else at the table except for Lebanese, in talks that were brokered by the Americans. So they can point to a strengthening of Lebanese diplomatic sovereignty in this regard. I think that you can put these two things together, and you can also note that when it comes to Washington, they want to decouple the Iranian file from the Lebanon file, as do the Israelis. The Israelis don't want the ceasefire discussions with Iran to have anything to do with them when it comes to Lebanon. They want these two files to be completely separate. And in many ways, they are completely separate, right? I mean, the fact is that Lebanon should be in complete control of any diplomatic discussions with regards to its own country. At the same time, one cannot deny the reality that Hezbollah is a Lebanese movement, right? These are Lebanese citizens that are fighting under the banner of Hezbollah. But the leadership of Hezbollah is really tightly connected to the IRGC, the Iranian regime, and IRGC officers have been present on the ground, engaging with Hezbollah, according to many reports. So there is a linkage here. The question is, who's supposed to be in charge of Lebanon? It's not Israel that's supposed to be in charge of Lebanon. It's not Iran that's supposed to be in charge of Lebanon. It should be solely and completely the government of Lebanon, and everybody should respect that if we're looking to see any sort of comprehensive, sustainable solution for the country.
Again, getting back to this present ceasefire, one of among many, how much does the war in Iran change the equation here? In other words, does it make the ceasefire more urgent or more fragile?
I think that we're beginning to see, practically speaking, effectively speaking, something of a decoupling in that regard. So just to give you an idea, the Iranians said that Lebanon had to be part of the ceasefire. Well, there was no ceasefire in Lebanon until yesterday, and there was a round of talks in Pakistan between the Americans and the Iranians last week, and another round that should be happening fairly soon. These were not dependent on a ceasefire in Lebanon. Okay, now people were talking about it all the time, so you could argue there was a linkage, but there was no dependency. It wasn't as though the Iranians got to Pakistan and said, we're not going into that room until there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. There was none of that. Okay, and there was no suggestion that they weren't going to go for a second round unless there was unless there was actually a ceasefire in Lebanon. Okay, so there is something of a decoupling taking place here. Which again could be good and could be bad depending on how you look at it. If there's less pressure on the file, then it means that the Israelis will feel more empowered to do as they see fit. And certainly that's been the case with regards to the Israelis in Lebanon for quite some time. Having said that, if the Americans feel that they're going to lose out with regards to the Iranians, and that's really what they want to focus on right now, then they will put leverage on Tel Aviv, on the Israelis, to be, relatively more reasonable. And they do have leverage. And I should remind your viewers that there should be no confusion here. Tel Aviv does not operate except that it thinks that it can get away with it vis-a-vis Washington, D.C. And if Washington and the Trump administration want to stop Netanyahu from doing something, they've got plenty of leverage in order to make sure that happens.
Just a couple more questions for you, H.A. As you know, Hezbollah has suffered enormous losses, commanders, infrastructure, weapons stockpiles. Does a weakened Hezbollah make a lasting peace more achievable, or does it create possibly a vacuum that makes southern Lebanon more volatile, not less?
So a couple of things here. One, they were incredibly weakened. I think that, frankly, they rearmed quite effectively over recent months, which is why it wasn't a walk in the park once the Israelis started hitting southern Lebanon over recent weeks. So that's one. Two, Hezbollah is a non-state militia. Okay, I mean, they have they do have an occupying force in the Israelis. Okay, so no one should dispute that. It's not that they're imagining this, okay? But it is a non-state militia. It does not function under the jurisdiction of the Lebanese Ministry of Defense or Interior or any government department. And if you want to have a genuinely stable Lebanon, then there must be a monopoly on the use of force by the Lebanese state, interior, defense, whatever it is, but it must be a monopoly under the Lebanese state. If it isn't, then it's simply anarchy waiting to happen. And in this case, the Hezbollah has given an excuse to a foreign power, i.e. the Israelis, to escalate on the people of southern Lebanon and Lebanon more generally. I do want to remind your viewers that even before Hezbollah, quote unquote, entered the war in March, there were numerous ceasefire violations by the Israelis over the previous months that led to attacks on Lebanese civilians prior to that, even though there had been, quote unquote, a ceasefire in place.
Right. You mentioned that there is a decoupling going on. To that end, this Lebanon truce is happening while U.S.-Iran ceasefire is itself on a countdown, with talks on the verge possibly of a collapse. If the wider Iran ceasefire falls apart next week, will this Lebanon deal get pulled under with it?
I don't think so, which again, I think is also evidence that there is a decoupling taking place. It hasn't happened completely, but I think effectively it's getting there. I think that if there is a breakdown, which by the way, I also don't think is going to happen, but I'll put that to one side. I don't think that you'll see the end of talks between the Lebanese and the Israelis. The Lebanese are frankly really desperate to get to some sort of, not normalization, but some sort of non-aggression deal with the Israelis. Not normalization. It is a very, very difficult prospect to imagine there being normalization between Beirut and Tel Aviv, despite all of the funny things that I keep hearing in places like Washington. The Lebanese people more generally are not interested in normalization with the state of Israel. Neither are the Syrians, for that matter. So all this talk about widening the Abraham Accords, I just don't think is particularly realistic. But they both want a non-aggression pact because they simply want the Israelis to stop bombing them and leave them alone.
Okay, I think we will end it there. That's H.L. Hellier. Many, many thanks, H.A. I want to take a moment now to remind you of the top developments in the conflict in Lebanon and the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. A 10-day U.S.-backed truce between Lebanon and Israel has come into effect and is reported to be holding. Thousands of Lebanese have begun returning to their homes in southern Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli troops will remain in Lebanon despite the ceasefire. Hezbollah says that it's keeping its finger on the trigger in case of any Israeli violations. And U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. is very close to making a deal with Iran, and he believes a second round of peace talks with Iran could take place over the weekend. Thanks. That's all of it for now. I appreciate you joining this DW live stream. We'll see you next time.